Hello A&P2 students. This video is going to cover the urinary system, and we are way down here. We hit the objectives. The urinary system is going to be under exam 4, the objectives for exam 4, and it's listed here, and I already have it pulled up, so let me pull it up here. So we're going to start talking about general functions of the urinary system. We'll get into some more anatomy. We've had some of the anatomy already in lab, or we're planning on having it soon. But we have some more information, mainly some more microscopic anatomy that we need to discuss before we start talking about the physiology of the kidneys primarily. All right, so I'm going to make this a little bit larger. The first objective is to identify the structures that compose the urinary system. Those are pretty straightforward. We have our kidneys, our ureters, our bladder, and then the urethra. And just general functions for each one of those. Kidneys are going to filter the urine. Kidneys are going to filter the blood, and they're going to produce urine. The ureter, that's the tube that's going to be a transport tube. So it gets the urine that's created in the kidneys to the bladder. And then the purpose of the bladder is to store the urine. It can hold like up to 1 liter of urine. And so that's its purpose, is to store the urine. And then the urethra is the tube that is going to be used to expel the urine from the body. All right, so that's kind of a general function of each one of those parts. We are going to now focus on the kidneys and the general functions of the kidneys. And I'm going to pull up, oops, here we go. I might have to go, I kind of went a little farther forward, so we'll go back here. And there are quite a few functions of the kidneys. You also covered these in lab. So I think you just covered these top 5 though. So we're going to talk about a few more that's a little bit lower here. So the elimination of waste products is one of the functions that most people think of when they think of kidneys, but realize they do a whole lot more than just removing waste from the body. Anything that's in the body that is in excess or we don't need. So things that aren't technically waste, like certain ions, hydrogen ions, hydroxide ions, calcium ions, potassium, all those, the kidneys help to keep the balance of those in the body where they need to be. So it does a lot of regulating, or involved in the regulation of the balances of certain ions in the body. I kind of included hydrogen ions in there, but they made them a separate function about the maintenance of acid-base balance in the body. So having that right amount of hydrogen ions to hydroxide ions so that we get that pH that our cells can function very well in. And the pH, which is 7.4, that's our normal pH. That's a pH where we don't have a lot of damage to our molecules in our body if we keep it at that right pH. So it's also going to help with the balancing of those hydrogen ions. And we'll talk about bicarbonate ions a little bit more too. And then regulation of blood pressure. So we actually talked a little bit about that when we talked about blood pressure in the blood vessel chapter. So you may have remembered angiotensin II was one of the hormones that we talked about that would help to regulate blood pressure by regulating urine production. So those are another role of the kidneys. It has a role in regulating blood pressure, and we'll talk a little bit more about that too. And then the elimination of just molecules in the body that aren't maybe technically waste, but they're molecules that are formed in the body and we don't need anymore. So like hormones, drugs that we might take. I guess you technically call those waste too, but but they can be excreted or will be excreted in the urine. They can be excreted other ways too. So those are the biologically active molecules that'll be eliminated too, again, if we don't need them. All right, so those are those first 5. And then there's 3 additional functions that don't really go along with the filtering of the blood and all that we just talked about. They kind of stand alone, so they put them down here in their own little section. And we talked about calcitrol. If you're not familiar with that, that's technically vitamin D, so it's called calcitrol. And we mainly talked about vitamin D being formed in our skin, and that's true. We have a precursor molecule in our skin that once the sun hits it, it'll convert it to vitamin D, but it's not technically the final vitamin D product. So then that molecule needs to travel through the body. It actually stops in the liver and goes through a chemical reaction. Then it'll go to the kidneys, and then it'll go through a chemical reaction. And so the kidneys have a role in the formation of vitamin D, just like our skin does. So, and then remember, vitamin D or calcitrol is involved in the absorption of calcium from the small intestines. We have to have vitamin D for the calcium to get absorbed from our intestines and get into our bloodstream. So, and then the second one, this is a hormone, erythropoietin. So that hormone, so kidneys have a minor role in the endocrine system because they do have, the kidneys does have cells that can produce a hormone. And this hormone, we may have talked a little bit about that when we were talking about the blood. That hormone is, the kidneys get a lot of the cardiac output every minute. So like 25% of the blood that's leaving the heart every minute going to the kidneys. So the kidneys are a good organ to kind of survey the blood, since they see a lot of it each minute, and determine if the oxygen levels are where they should be. So the kidneys will do that, determine if, and a lot of times they're determining whether it's too low. That's going to be our main, probably more common problem. If the oxygen levels get too low, the kidneys are going to serve as the receptor. They'll detect that, and then they serve as the control center, because then they'll release a hormone called erythropoietin that'll get in the bloodstream. And then that erythropoietin will head towards the bone marrow, if going to go to those bones that have the most bone marrow, and then stimulate the bone marrow to, we need to make more red blood cells so we can get more oxygen carried throughout the body for our cells to use. So that's the endocrine role of our kidneys. And then the last one is gluconeogenesis. So the kidneys have a role in this process. So if we have a situation where we're not eating very much, and especially for prolonged periods of time, the kidneys may engage in gluconeogenesis, and that's just a chemical process where we can produce, body cells can produce glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, so things that aren't sugars or starches, and that's to help kind of keep the sugar levels in our blood where they need to be. So that's kind of a kind of function that may happen if we get into a situation where we're deprived of nutrients for long periods of time. All right, so those are our functions that you should be familiar with. Oops, wrong one. Or was I at the right one? I was at the right one. There we go. All right, so that was 1 and 2. 3 is I'm kind of doing the videos with the impression that you have went over the urinary system and you know all those parts. So I'll start talking about those structures, and I won't go into a lot of detail about them because that's what we covered in lab. So I just put that in there, just realized that we're going to be talking about a lot of those structures that you learned in lab, and so I'll be talking with the idea that you know that information. So if you need to review that, you can do that. Same way with the nephron. Knowing all the parts of the nephron is important. All right, and then I think we covered 4 in lab as well. Compare the 2 types of nephrons. So that was in lab too. We had the cortical nephrons. That's the majority of the nephrons in our kidneys. Remember the nephron, we're starting to talk about nephrons now. Remember the nephron, that is the functional unit of the kidneys. So that's where blood is filtered and urine is formed, is in each of the nephrons. And they're microscopic structures, but there's like 1 million in each of our kidneys. And they're located primarily, most of the nephrons are located in the cortex of the kidney, most of the parts of the nephron. Then those little loops that they have, loops of Henle or nephron loops, that's kind of what distinguishes the 2 types of nephrons from each other. So the cortical nephrons, the loop of Henle for the cortical nephron is very short compared to the juxtamedullary nephron, and it stays mainly in the cortex, and only a little bit of it is actually present or located in the medulla of the kidney, as opposed to the juxtamedullary nephron, where it has a really much longer loop of Henle. So that loop of Henle is going to be located much more deeply into the medulla. And the reason for those juxtamedullary nephrons having that really long loop of Henle is because that's where we're going to maintain hydration of the body, is in that really long loop of Henle that goes deep into the medulla. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, about how the body, how those nephrons, those juxtamedullary nephrons, help to maintain our hydration and kind of make sure our urine's concentrated and we're not losing too much water from our urine. So we'll talk about that. There is a picture of that, and see if I can. There's our kidneys, and I apologize. There's so many on here. Oops, was that? That was just showing one nephron. Let's see. Ah, there we go. So this is the picture. It's probably on page 962, at least online. Has the cortical nephron shown over here with its little short loop of Henle so this area here is kind of the division between the cortex of the renal cortex of the kidney and the renal medulla. So just a little bit of it. But then if you look at the juxtamedullary nephron, its little loop of Henle goes really down deep into the medulla. Like pretty much all of it's in the medulla. So and again, this one's gonna be involved in a lot of concentrating of the urine, and we'll talk about that later. And there's only, of all the nephrons, the majority are cortical nephrons, 85% of them are cortical nephrons. So these only make up about 15% of the nephrons in our kidneys, but they play a very important role. So we'll talk about that later. With the wrong one again. Okay, so that was number 4. Compare the 2 types of nephrons. And the next one is to describe the juxtaglomerular apparatus. I'm going to enlarge this. Didn't do a very good job, did I? Because I was hitting the wrong button. There we go. Okay, so we'll, since we're almost up to 15 minutes on this video, we'll start on the next video and cover a little bit more of the anatomy of the kidneys and urinary system. All right, we will see you.